Welcome back, chameleons, to Aspie Answers as your host, Aspie Answers. For those of you who are new to my podcast today, I welcome you all, and I'm hoping that you'll get to know me more of a person behind the mic, as well as the diagnosis of autism and mental health. Just a brief little intro about me for those of you who are new today. I'm Aspie Answers, as I said quickly. I'm all about creating mental health videos as well as autism videos, taking you all on a journey when I'm able, as well as advocating, navigating through life through autism and mental health, as well as educating you all and so much more.
I would like to put 3 disclaimers on right now as I'm doing this podcast. Number 1 is I'm not a medical doctor. I'm just your normal Joe blog sharing my lived experiences with Aspergers syndrome, or Aspergers in short. That some things I may share, how I cope on the daily, may or may not work for you, and what may or may not work for you will not work for me, or vice versa. What works for me will work for you. Hearsay, and in saying this, that if there's any signs and symptoms that presents to the cases of what I share of these everyday topics of mental health and autism, do seek professional advice and second opinion, as well as also just in saying that I don't wish to see any harm in the making. The second part of the disclaimer here I would like to discuss is, as I go along sharing you with the podcast of the topics, the terms I'll be using, like Aspergers and autism, will likely to interchange a bit throughout the series, and I don't want to offend anyone. This will go for the terminologies of people with autism, persons with autism.
This again will depend on the person who has autism, of the actual how they want to be addressed as an autistic or a person with autism. So be respectable when you do meet an autistic, hearsay, because obviously at the end of the day we don't want to, like I said, offend anyone, and saying this, that of this offence we should be able to just remove our mentality and just be respectable of others' opinions, beliefs and what have you, because at the end of the day everyone's different. Ask an autistic first before maybe addressing them as an autistic person or what have you. Just get to know them as a person as a whole behind the autism, as well as removing that kind of wishful thinking that everyone is the same
or what have you. But more of that of the case, how to address the autistic community and the executive functioning labels or what have you, that I will be presenting in one of the series over. Since I'm an autistic, don't forever assume that, you know, as you're getting to know me as a person behind the voice or behind the actual camera, that every autistic is the same. Every autistic will be different, because obviously autism is a wide spectrum of different kind of conditions that branches out. But I'll be sharing more about autism, what it's like later on in one of my podcasting pieces.
The topics that are being shared right now as I'm sharing with you all today will obviously be based on an American, UK or Aussie website or any other websites as I do my research, because as I said before, that many of these research findings that I'm doing right now will be based on this areas, because New Zealand has unlimited resources and references to what I'm sharing with you all on the everyday topics that you may be questioning on and want to learn from me, based on also my lived experiences as well. And in saying this, while I give you some tips and advice along the way, please be considerate inside the actual advice part of it, as this is just strictly based on my lived experiences. As I said, some of this may work for you versus vice versa may not work for you as well, so let's just be respectable of each other's differences of opinions here.
So this is episode, or shall we say episode 2, as we said, all about autism and Aspergers syndrome. So hopefully if you've been following me, you are enjoying these series so far. Just let me know, hopefully either in the comments or via through my social media feeds that are listed below you while you're listening to my podcast, so that hopefully I can have some feedback. As you're aware, as I said before, that I would like to try and do as much advocating, educating to you all about autism and Aspergers syndrome, along with my mental health, as well as guiding and navigating through life with it as on the daily as an autistic adult with these host of mental health conditions. Since, as you know, I'm very passionate about mental health and health in general, as well as some other passions that lies, if you've been listening to me in the very beginning, of getting to know me as a person as a whole behind that diagnosis of Aspergers syndrome and also the host of mental health conditions. So this one's going to be series 3, all about autism, what you need to know. So let's begin this. Autism spectrum disorder, or ASD for short, that is clinically known as a broad term used to describe a group of neurodevelopmental disorders. These disorders are characterized by problems with communication and social interaction. People with autism spectrum disorder often demonstrate restricted, repetitive, and stereotyped interest or patterns of behavior. ASD is found in individuals around the world regardless of race, culture, or economic background. According to the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention in America of the trusted source, autism does occur more often in boys than in girls, with a 4:1 male to female ratio. The CDC estimated in 2014 that nearly 1 in 59 children have been identified with ASD. There are indications that instances of autism spectrum disorder are, however, on the rise. Some attribute this increase to environmental factors. However, experts debate whether there's an actual increase in cases or just more frequent diagnosis. You can compare autism rates in different states throughout the country of either America, Australia, and worldwide, because every statistic of this will vary from different states of the world. So, as I said before in the very beginning of my series on YouTube, if you've been watching, or even on my podcast, however, there are different types of autism versus also, as I mentioned, that there has been many differentiations of the changes of how to actually use these terminologies or clinical terms for this. But as a result, though, however, there has been a diagnostic manual that was introduced in 1994, especially for the term of Aspergers syndrome, that is now classified under the umbrella of the autism spectrum disorder as autism in itself. But then again, however, there has been this diagnostic statistical manual of mental disorder was published by, or is published by, the American Psychiatric Association, that has been clinically used by clinicians as well as medical experts in this field to diagnose a variety of psychiatric disorders. However, the most up-to-date and recent edition is the 5th edition of the DSM, which was released in 2013 worldwide. The DSM-5 currently recognizes 5 different ASD subtypes or specifiers. They are 1, with or without accompanying intellectual impairment; 2, with or without accompanying language impairment; 3, associated with a known medical or genetic condition or environmental factor; or 4, associated with another neurodevelopmental, mental, or behavioral disorder; or 5, with catatonia, which I'm hoping to discuss more about catatonia, because this is a real less talked about topic later on in the piece. So sit tight for this if you want to find out more, which will be interesting for us all to learn more from each other. So, as I mentioned also, I'm not sure, prior to the DSM-5 manual that has been introduced, people on the autism spectrum may have been diagnosed with one of the following disorders: autistic disorder, Aspergers syndrome, pervasive developmental disorder not otherwise specified, which is PD-NOS. If you want to find out more about this, of the PPD-NOS that I mentioned earlier, you can go back to my YouTube channel, which should be up there, and I'll link it also in this podcast for you guys to follow through if you want to actually maybe later on in the piece listen to it too. Or else there's another one called childhood disintegrative disorder. It's important to note, however, that a person who received one of these earlier diagnoses hasn't lost their diagnosis and won't be needed to be re-evaluated. According to the DSM-5, however, the broader diagnosis of ASD encompasses disorders such as Aspergers syndrome as well. So you may be questioning, next in the mix for this is, what are the symptoms or signs of autism? So basically here is, autism symptoms typically become clearly evident during early childhood, between 12 and 24 months of age. However, some symptoms may also appear earlier or later in life as well. Early symptoms may include a marked delay in language and social development. The DSM-5 divides symptoms of autism into 2 categories: problems with communication and social interaction, or restricted or repetitive patterns of behavior or activity. So under that category of the first one, problems with communication and social interaction may include the following. Issues with communication may include difficulties in sharing their own emotions, sharing interests, or maintaining a back and forth conversation with other people. Issues with non-verbal communication, such as trouble maintaining eye contact or reading body language. Difficulties developing and maintaining relationships. It doesn't have to be like a relationship that you're dating or courting with a boy or a girl to girl ratio. It could be also just a relationship between a friend, a family member, so on and so forth. However, on the other hand of that other category, restricted or repetitive patterns of behavioral activities may include the following: repeated movements, motions, or speech patterns; rigid adherence to specific routines and or behaviors; an increase or decrease in sensitivity to specific sensory information from their surroundings, such as a negative reaction to a specific sound, fixated interest, or preoccupation. Individuals are evaluated within each of these categories, and the severity of their symptoms will be noted. In order to receive an ASD diagnosis, however, a person must display all 3 symptoms in the first category and at least 2 symptoms in the second category that I've just recently mentioned. Next on the list is the causes of autism. The exact cause of ASD is unknown. The most current research demonstrates that there's no single cause, but however, there has been some suspected risk factors for autism that may include the following: having an immediate family member with autism, maybe a genetic mutation, Fragile X syndrome and other genetic disorders, being born to older parents, low birth weight, metabolic imbalances, exposure to heavy metals and environmental toxins, a history of viral infections, fetal exposure to the medications valproic acid, which is dipicaine or thalidomide or thilamide. According to the National Institute of Neurological Disorders and Stroke, both genetics and environment may determine whether a person may develop autism. Multiple sources, however, old and new trusted source has concluded that the disorder, however, isn't caused by vaccines. There has been recent debates over many years based on one of the guys that I mentioned about this vaccines doesn't cause autism, so on and so forth, which I'll hopefully find in my recorded piece of my YouTube video to follow through, which hopefully later on also I'll bring it into my podcast to research in more depth. It'll just give you guys a lowdown of what this is all about, so you can gain a better understanding also on this, because obviously in this day and age, however, there was a controversial study that was proposed in 1998 of a link between autism and the measles, mumps and rubella vaccine. However, that study has been debunked by other research and was eventually restricted in the 2010 trusted source. So what tests are used to diagnose autism? As we know, basically for an ASD diagnosis, this will involve several different screenings, genetic tests and evaluation. These are the following that you can follow through. So the developmental screening. American Academy of Pediatrics, they will recommend that all children undergo some screening for ASD at the ages of 18 and 24 months. Screening can help with the earlier identification of children who have ASD. These children may benefit from early diagnosis and intervention. The modified checklist for autism in toddlers, or MCHAT, is a common screening tool used by many pediatric offices. This includes a 23-question survey that is filled out by the parent. Pediatricians then can use this as the responses provided to identify children that may be at risk of having ASD. It's important to note, however, that screening isn't a diagnosis. Children who screen positively for ASD don't necessarily have the disorder. Additionally, screenings sometimes don't detect every child that has ASD. Other screenings and tests. You may be wondering, or your child physician may recommend a combination of tests for autism that may include the following: DNA testing for genetic diseases, behavioral evaluation, visual and audio tests to rule out any issues with vision and hearing that ain't related to autism, occupational therapy screening, developmental questionnaires such as the Autism Diagnostic Observation Schedule, or the ADOS, which is basically abbreviated down to. Diagnoses are typically made by a team of specialists. This team may include child psychologists, occupational therapists, or speech or language pathologists. So next question is, how is autism treated? However, like anything in this day and age, be it your mental health, autism and some other conditions, there are no cures. So you can't wave the wand, abracadabra, be gone, hearsay for autism or anything in general. But therapies and other treatment considerations can help people feel better or alleviate their symptoms. Many treatment approaches involve therapies such as behavioral therapy, play therapy, occupational therapy, physical therapy, speech therapy, massages, weighted blankets and clothing, and meditation techniques may induce relaxing effects. However, treatment may vary from person to person, just to bear in mind, as I mentioned before. So if you are looking for any of the treatments for your child with autism or teen or whoever yourself, if you're listening today, just have an open mind that, as I said before, many times before, have an open mind for these and just try it one by one. If one doesn't work for you, keep trying until you find one that you feel well suited and comfortable with, and just continue using that. Because at the end of the day, as I said before also, that what may work for me may not work for you, and vice versa. What will work for you may not work for me for certain treatments, methods and techniques. So it's a matter of just respecting each other's differences here. So there's also some alternative treatments you can look out for for managing autism that could include high dose vitamins, gelatin therapy that involves the flushing metals from the body, if there's any metals inside the body of the child, hyperbaric oxygen therapy, melatonin to address any sleep issues, because it has been known for some autistic children, teens or whoever, they may become sleep deprived. But there has been research on alternative treatments that is mixed, and some of these treatments can be dangerous. So again, seek your doctor, psychologist, or whoever that diagnosed you with autism to best fit for your safety and well-being will work for you based on any treatments that you feel fit for you. Also in saying this, before investing in any of these treatments, also parents and caregivers should weigh out the options of the research and financial costs against any possible benefits towards these treatments as well. The question that some people may have on their mind, can diet have an impact on autism as well? There has been no specific diet that has been diagnosed for people with ADHD. Nevertheless, some autism advocates are exploring dietary changes in their way of helping to minimize behavioral issues and increase overall quality of life for themselves. A foundation of the autism diet is the avoidance of artificial additives such as these is your colors and sweetness. An autism diet may instead focus on whole foods such as your fresh fruit and vegetables, lean poultry, fish, and saturated fat, and lots of water. Some autism advocates you may have heard in the past may also endorse a gluten-free diet. Gluten is found in wheat, barley, and other grains. These advocates believe that gluten creates inflammation and adverse bodily reactions in certain people with ADHD. However, scientific research is inconclusive on the relationship between autism, gluten, and any other protein or another protein, especially that is known as casein. Some studies and anecdotal evidence have suggested diet can help improve symptoms of attention deficit hyperactivity disorder or ADHD, conditions similar to autism basically, which I did talk about an autism versus an ADHD diet on my channel, which again hopefully I'll find it and link it into this podcast for you guys to follow. How does autism affect kids? Well, children with autism may not reach the same developmental milestones as their peers that are your neurotypicals or neurodivergents as we are now calling them these days, or they may demonstrate loss of social or language skills previously developed, as I mentioned earlier. For instance, a classic example, a 2-year-old without autism may show interest in simple games of make-believe. A 4-year-old without autism may also enjoy engaging in activities with other children. However, on the other hand, when you're looking for this example, a child with autism may have trouble interacting with others or dislike it altogether. Children with autism may also engage in repetitive behaviors as mentioned before, having difficulty sleeping or compulsively eating non-food items. They might find it hard to thrive without a structured environment or a consistent routine. If your child has autism, you may have to work closely with their teachers to ensure they succeed in the classroom. Many resources are available to help children with autism as well as their loved ones. There are local groups that can be found through the national non-profit of the Autism Society and other groups that can look online too. Autism and exercise. Children with autism may find that certain exercises can play a role in alleviating frustrations and promoting overall well-being. Any type of exercise that your child enjoys can be beneficial. Walking and simply having fun on the playground are both ideal. Swimming and being in the water can serve as both exercise and a sensory play activity. Sensory play activities can help people with autism who may have trouble processing signals from their own senses. Sometimes contact sports may be difficult for children with autism. You can instead encourage other forms of challenging yet strengthening exercises. To get started with these, there are some tips on arm circles, stump jumps, and other autism exercises for kids. So next question on the list you may be wondering is, how does autism affect girls? Because as we know, autism is clinically known basically in guys. Because of its gender specific prevalence, it is stereotyped as often as a boy's condition. According to the CDC trusted source, ASDs are often about 4 times more common in boys than girls, as I said earlier. However, this doesn't mean that autism doesn't occur in girls. No, don't forever get it wrong. In fact, the CDC estimates that 0.66% or around 1 in every 152 girls have autism. Autism may even present differently in women too, as I mentioned in one of my videos about autism in women on the spectrum, which hopefully, again, I'll find that in my channel and link this up too if I can find it for you guys. In comparison though, however, to recent decades, autism is being tested earlier and more often now. This leads to higher reported rates in both boys and girls. Again, another thing is, how does it affect adults for autism? Families who have loved ones with ASD may worry about what life with autism looks like for an adult. A minority of adults with ASD may go on to live or work independently. However, many adults with ASD require continued aid or intervention throughout their life. Introducing therapies and other treatments early in life can help lead to more independence and better quality of life. Sometimes people who are on the spectrum aren't diagnosed until much later in life. This is due in part to a previous lack of awareness among medical practitioners in the past. Seek help if you can if you do suspect you have adult autism. It's never too late to be diagnosed. So you may be wondering, why is autism awareness is important? As we know, basically April is the month of World Autism Month or what have you. It's also been deemed National Autism Awareness Acceptance Month in the United States, and however it is trying to be worldwide as well for this. However, many advocates have rightly called for the need to increase awareness about ASD year round and not just during that 30 select days listed. Autism awareness also requires empathy and an understanding that ASDs are different for everyone. Certain treatments and therapies can work for some people but not others, as I clearly mentioned earlier. Parents and caregivers can also have differing opinions on the best way to advocate for a child with autism or the understanding autism. People who are on the spectrum starts with awareness, but it doesn't end there. It's all about acceptance as well once you get this done and dusted. So you may be wondering, what's the difference between autism and ADHD? Autism and ADHD are sometimes confused with one to the other. Children diagnosed with ADHD consistently have issues with fidgeting, concentrating and maintaining eye contact with others. These symptoms are also seen in some people on the spectrum. Despite some similarities, ADHD isn't considered an autism spectrum disorder. One major difference between the two is that people with ADHD don't tend to lack socio-communicative skills. If you think your child has symptoms of hyperactivity, do seek your doctor and talk to your doctor about possible ADHD testing for your child. Getting a clear diagnosis is essential to ensure that your child is receiving the correct treatment for them. It's also possible for a person to have both autism and ADHD. So you may be wondering, last but not least, what's the outlook for people with autism? As I said before, no cures for autism spectrum disorders. The most effective treatments involve early and intensive behavioural interventions. The earlier a child is enrolled in these programs, the better their outlook will be. Just to remember as I end this, that autism is complex and it takes time for a person with ASD to find the program that's best suited for them. So this quickly ends Series 3 of Episode 2, all about autism and Aspergers syndrome. Thanks for listening, and I'm hoping that you've enjoyed. And next in the piece will be me sharing about where you can find me, so stay tuned for that. Also, where to find me, this again will be listed in the socials, but just to tell you right now, is Facebook is my Aspie.answers, my Twitter again will be Aspie Answers, which they're both capital A. Spotify obviously is Aspie Answers, which is capital A, capital A. YouTube is Aspie Answers, again capital A. Patreon is my crowdfunding page right now. You can find me on patreon.com, Aspie Answers basically. And for those of you who don't know what Patreon is, today for those who are listening that are new, I have this set up for funding for future projects like this one of my podcast versus my merch that I've been designing, which I'll share more briefly soon about my merch update, or even in this podcast right now as I'm addressing this to you guys, is that it's like a crowdfunding page or funding page for creators like me, or content creators, music creators, whoever it may be that's seeking out funding to support themselves in a way of, maybe say they need extra equipment for their cameras versus maybe their radio equipment if they were doing something similar like I am doing today, or covering their rent, travel costs, what have you. And in saying this, also basically for the merch, you'll see me basically maybe wearing it once in a while on my YouTube channel, as well as maybe, you know, out and about in public. And so in saying this, my merch site is spreadshirt.com, life-of-and-Aspie. And another one you can find me on my social is for those who haven't, and I like to read instead of watching or what have you, as an alternative for you guys, is lifeofanasbieweb.wordpress.com. So this wraps up everything. I want to thank you all for listening right now. Follow me on the socials that were listed below. Subscribe, share this podcast to friends and family. You know, if you want to, feel free to become a Patreon to support this future project, as well as many others that is in the works as of this time. Feel free to you know, donate big or small with me and this journey of it. And also my merch obviously will cover the cost for this as well. So I'll catch you all again on the other side. Aspie signing out for now, and bye.